Right now, and welcome. We're glad that you're here. Obviously, a number of you are recognizable faces and names to us, in part because you've been a part with us over the last several webinars, and we're certainly glad that you were. And we're certainly glad to finish this process by having sort of an open Q&A. You'll notice there's no screen share, which means this: Wayne and I didn't prepare anything, meaning that there's no new content. You are bringing us the content. We're talking about whatever you want to, and whatever questions you have, whether it is something related to something that one of us said in the webinars in the last couple of weeks, or anything else around remote work, the future of work, leadership, life in Toronto, or whatever you might want to talk about. So we'll take all those questions to Andrea. We'll just do it that way. Before we get to your questions, and this was not scripted at all, so Wayne, feel free to say nothing at all if you want. Anything that's on your mind today that you want to share with this group before we dive in?
Not particularly, other than it is an honor to have people over so many years put their faith in us and, want to hear from us and talk to us, and we take that very seriously. So whether you are new to the Kevin Eikenberry Group, remote leadership, or you're a longtime compatriot, we're honored that you're here, and we're going to make good use of your time.
So I won't, because I got a direct message, I won't say from whom, but they said they'd love to have the recordings. And you're the second person that said that to me. I believe that you will have access to the recordings, or actually already do. So a couple people are nodding. I mean, I know that that's the intent. And so if perhaps you've missed an email about that, you might check your spam, or you might check for those. And if you still don't see it, send us a note, send us an email afterwards, and we'll be happy to make sure that you get them, because that was the intent, is that you would have them. And if you're knee deep in this process and you of the future of work discussions, and the webinars are useful, and there's anything else we can do beyond that, beyond today, of course, let us know. So, hello, Thea, good to see you. Wayne would probably say, so Kevin, do you have anything you want to say before we start? And I can certainly echo everything that Wayne said. And, we had a conversation, I don't know now, a couple of months ago, and we said, we need to see what we can do to help people with all this future of work stuff. So we put together this mini webinar series, culminating with today, with the intent to be of service. And hopefully it has been. And so that closes with you being able to say, here's what we want to talk about, Kevin. Here's the questions that we have, or again, whether it's following up from one of the other webinars, or just what you're dealing with, where you're at. I remember last week and of course, not all the same people are necessarily here, but when I did the webinar last week, I asked how many people know what's going on in your organization about the future of work. And it was like 85% said, we don't know what's going to happen yet. Whether you're a decision maker about it or not, like either we haven't talked about it, or I haven't been told about it. So that's a huge percentage, right? And so let's just open it up. You can ask your question by unmuting. You can ask your question in the chat. Doesn't matter to us. We're going to talk about whatever you all want to talk about. So does anybody have some place you want us to start?
I do. I have a question for you, and thank you both so much for absolutely doing this, very timely. And I have found myself involved in these conversations where I work, and it's been very interesting to watch the evolution of how they are willing to support remote work. And then when it comes down to the practical reality of it, they're really struggling with it, and they fall back on the culture word. And so I guess from your perspective, knowing that, change is hard for everybody. We rose to the challenge when it was a pandemic and we had to, but now as the world potentially slows down, how would you recommend managing sort of the fallback to we've always done it this way, or I like in person better, so we're going to go right back to in person, and which will keep them from continuing to keep our competitive edge.
So before we answer, and Wayne, you can go first and then I'll close, if whatever you've got, Wayne. But before we do that, Thea, I know that you work, in 2 different states.
Mhm.
And so I'm just interested to know if the geography, is there a difference in this? I know if we always did it that way, it was the same in both states.
Right.
But is there a difference in the geography in terms of how people are feeling, or what you think the employees want, need, expect? I'm just curious, because very different states, parts of the country.
It is. I will tell you, the folks, within our team that have worked remote and have worked remote in other states, their feelings haven't changed. I mean, they still feel like it's a great benefit. They feel very grateful to do it. Our corporation, because I work in healthcare, we were very fortunate in that we kept our jobs and we were kept whole. And there's a lot of loyalty to the organization. I think the people who work remotely in another state, there are times when they feel like they don't get everything that everybody who's locally gets. And so I think organizationally, I'm optimistic because I think our HR gets it. So, right, we have a senior vice president who has advocated for us, and they get it, and they have heard those voices, and they do understand that for us to continue to recruit great talent, we have to get over ourselves and say that everybody's going to move to Beverly Hills, California. So I think they get it. I think our C-suite does struggle with just the change in general. So I don't know that that's different from one state to another, though I find it a little frustrating, because out of California, you would think that they would be more open to it, because commuting and paying cost of living and the Silicon Valley, yes, we're not in the Silicon Valley, but it's, to the north, that they would be more progressive in it. So I think I'm more disappointed in the fallback given they're in California than I would given being in Minnesota.
So thank you for letting this Q&A be one of me asking rather than being so
we didn't say who was queuing and who was
that's exactly right. This is a focus group, everyone. We are about to ask you all a bunch of questions. So Thea said, how do we keep them from just going back to the way it used to be, because that's what we liked? And they're trying to play, I think you said, the culture card. Mm-hmm. Wayne, you want to go first there?
Yeah, boy, I feel a little bit, I've had this conversation quite a bit in the past few weeks, and I'm feeling a little bit like a Debbie Downer. And here's why. Culture, of course, is a $10 HR word for this is how we do it here, right? And when they talk about company culture and whatever, it's just this is how we do it. And there are a lot of people who are pining for days that, as is so often the case, they're pining for days that did not really exist. It's not like in the before times, everything was perfect and fabulous and everything was as good as it could possibly be. So some of what we're seeing is just a desperate cry for something that looks like normal.
How long are you going to be, do you think, Alan?
But we're also starting to see, and I think 6 months from now, there's going to be a wave of turnover if companies are not careful, because now people have seen the alternative and they've lived, remote, and they go, I might not want to work remotely full time, but boy, a couple of days a week would be nice. And if organizations don't make accommodations and they don't, or they decide, no, we need everybody in the office, and if that's not okay with you, bye. We're going to see a wave of that in about 6 months. So I think organizations need to be really, really introspective right now and say, what are the hills to die on? The fact that I prefer everybody here may or may not be a hill they're willing to defend in the long term, because there are these other factors.
All right, so I've got a couple of thoughts. I've been having these conversations a lot as well. And obviously the two webinars that I led were a little more directed at this point, a little more than the two Wayne led.
Be careful.
We got someone we need to get muted here. Give me a second here. There we go. So two thoughts. First thought is how we need to, and you've all heard me say this, unless you missed one of these, that we need to make decisions about what the future of work is going to be, but how we make the decisions are almost as important as where we end up. Where we end up is super important, to Wayne's point, and I'll comment on that. But I think there are four things we have to take into account when we make the decision. And those are, what does the organization need? And I'll put the leaders in that, right? Since you especially said C-suite, right? But so I'm saying, what do the organization / senior leaders need? What do the organization senior leaders want? Now, you already told us what they want. Okay. I think that needs to be factored in. So what does the organization need? What does the organization want? What do the team members need? And what do the team members want? And we all know, if you have children, that there's difference between want and need. So let's first of all just be clear about what is it that we want versus what is that we need. I think we need to talk about them both. They all need to be all four of those things need to be on the table, but they all need to be on the table. So that's the first thing I would say.
And it's very interesting, their response. So my department in particular, and my profession has pushed remote for a long time. Right. So we're trying to have conversations about, well, if we demand everybody comes back into the state, and I look at them and say, well, that's great that you think that, but my profession has had remote people. And if you want to keep these skilled people that keep your $8 billion going out the door, you're going to have to accept this, or we're not going to have anybody, and so it's like they seem to buy it in my world, but they don't necessarily buy it in other pieces of our business, and maybe it'll evolve. They've been willing to accept it because I think they're afraid if they don't, they'll lose talent, to Wayne's point, and that's what will happen. People will leave, but they just kind of can't get over the fact that they don't believe that this is the same thing. So we'll see. All we can do is try and support them and try and demonstrate to them the model and say, hey, it can really work, and and if they don't like it, we'll leave, right?
Yeah.
Or, that's kind of the option.
So I think the next thing I would say is that I told my financial advisor this about 6 weeks ago. And I said, so in a few months, here's going to be a big part of my investment strategy. What organizations have said everyone's got to come back and then not invest in them? Now, Google said everybody's coming back, and Google might be a separate case because people want to work for Google, right? So they may not have the same challenges. I mean, I think they will have more turnover, right? I think they will have more turnover, but it might be a little different, but there's only a few of those. So there's my take on that part. I think that what Wayne said is exactly right. That is going to happen without question. Now, I want to go to the other part of what you said, about they play the culture card, or you said something along those lines. So Wayne's right. Culture is the way we do things around here. And there's three versions of that. There's the way it was, the way it is right now. But the real question is, what do we want it to be? The aspirational culture. Right? What's the aspirational culture? And so since you apparently maybe have the ear of senior leaders, or at least you're asking that senior leader question, I think that's the question that they need to wrestle with. What do we want the culture to be? And you hook that together with what do we want and need? We, all of us, organization and individuals, want and need about the work to get the work done successfully, and then bring culture in. And then loop back to Wayne's last point, which is everyone wants to talk about the good old days. And that's not just because of the pandemic. Like, people will say, man, the good old days, the 1950s were the good old days. Well, let me tell you all the things you didn't have in the 1950s. Well, maybe not. Like it's easy to idealize something we used to have and we are idealizing it, and we're idealizing 2019.
Totally agree. I totally agree. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. I still am optimistic. They are a progressive culture for the most part, even though we're in healthcare. And they tend to do the right thing when they get there. It's just sometimes we waste some money getting there. But
here's something though, Thea, and this is very unconsultant-y of me to say. And that is that nobody is going to get this right the first time. I mean, the way that we work, going to the office, doing all that stuff, is a little over 100 years old. It took a long time to develop habits and mindsets and the way that we worked and the way we thought about it. A year under extreme circumstances where a lot of it was just self-defense, keep treading water, try not to drown, is not a great basis for saying, okay, this is how it's going to be for the rest of time. We're in for a lot of chaos, and we're in for a lot of try-fail cycles, as we say in the novel writing business. And it's going to require being mindful, and there are going to be a lot of false starts. There's going to be a lot of, hey, we think we've got a policy. Oh, that's not working. Let's try something else. And so anybody who thinks, you know, we're going to have a meeting on the 30th of August and on Labor Day, this is how it's going to be from now on, is going to be in for a little bit of a rough ride.
Okay, so I lied to you all because I said I wasn't going to show you any slides, but I'm going to show you one to make a point. And I know Cheryl has read their long distance teammate. I know a number of you read the long distance leader. A number of you read the long distance teammate. And in the long distance leader, we share this model with you, and I want to make a point related to it. All of the decisions, y'all can see it now, yes?
Yep.
Okay, I always like to check to make sure people can see it. So, so real quick, all the decisions that we're going to make, and we're going to make some mistakes and we're going to fail. If we will keep the first two of these O's in mind, we'll make better decisions. There's a tension between we're trying to reach outcomes with and through others. That's leadership. Reaching desired outcomes with and through others, right? And there's a tension between those two, right? And so everything that Thea is saying is basically about, well, we need to get the work done, but what about how I want to work, right? And I think that if we can help people, help ourselves, because all of you can be thinking about this for your team, whatever the organization decides, right? There's still some parts of this that you have the chance to do something about, unless there's a straight up edict, right? Thou shalt all come back, or no one's ever coming back, whatever. Like there's going to be some room here. And so it's all about the tension between these two things. And if you can help decision makers, whoever that is, and our view of that would be more people involved in that decision, at least having input in it, right? But if you can help people think about that tension, you got a much better shot. Because that's fundamentally what it's all about, is the tension between those two things. Okay? I'll get rid of the slide. It just happened to be from a keynote I gave this morning, and it was right there. So there you go. If I can get things back the way I want them. There we go. So there are other questions that have come in. I got one that came into me as a direct message. How do you handle an employee working remotely that seems to have a lot going on? In short, they possibly need to seek professional help dealing with their family issues, their own ADD, and it's impacting their work performance. I think it's a great question.
I think it was Chris Christopherson who said, "You've been reading my mail."
Here's what I would say. I mean, if you're in an organization where you have, some employee assistance kinds of programs, I think you want to get people that help. I would say it's good that you know that, right? Leaders that are blissfully unaware of all of that, that's a problem. And all they see is that the person's not getting their work done. Like, so I give you kudos for recognizing that they've got a lot of stuff. And I think I mean, there's a lot of really smart HR people on this call, right, that might want to weigh in on this. But basically what you want to do is help them see that, that they, not the details, but that you want to be empathetic and you want to be supportive and helpful, and use whatever resources you have at your disposal to help them do that. And if you need, the last part of the question that was sent to me says it's beginning to negatively impact their work performance. Like, they need to know that, but it needs to outcomes and others. Focus on them, but help them see that there's an impact here that they need to be aware of. They may not be aware of that part, right? So, Wayne, you want to add to that, or anyone else want to add anything to that?
The only thing I'd add is this is such a delicate thing. And this is, of course, the hard part about being a manager, leader, and having people work for you, right? Is that you have to deal with people's stuff. But a big thing in situations like this is to remember that people take feedback as coming from three sources. There's the position of authority, there's the position of expertise, and the position of relationship. And it's unconscious because we're all good people who care and we want to do a good job. And we often think we're coming from a place of relationship, and what they see is us wearing the name tag. Right. And so we need to make really sure that we're having a conversation based on relationship rather than I am the boss, because especially the more personal it gets, the less I am the boss and I said so accomplishes what you want it to accomplish.
Yeah, that's well stated. That's well stated, Wayne. That core of what he just said is something that we teach in a lot of our workshops and stuff that I think is incredibly valuable that most people don't ever think about. Like, I'll just ask someone and say, so tell me, two people give you exactly the same feedback, exactly the same. Everything about it is exactly the same. Are you going to accept it, hear it and accept it and apply it exactly the same? And people go, of course not. Like, why not? Because it's two different people. And it comes down to those three things that Wayne just said. Do I think they're credible? Do they know what they're talking about? Do I trust them? Right? And as a leader, Wayne said three things: position or power, expertise, relationship. As a leader, you get one, you have to earn the other two. Yep, 100%. So Amy asked a question that you all can see if you're monitoring the chat. How do we? She ends with a very wonderful thing for Wayne and I, but the core of the question comes before that. How can we as managers or directors provide feedback upward to the chancellor's office, in my case, a large university, or senior leadership in the organization? I'd like to steer them to your group, blah, blah, blah. But I think that thank you, please do. But the question here is about how do we influence or give feedback upward in this particular topic? That's really the question Amy's asking. So I'm going to ask Wayne to go, and any of you that are already doing that or have been successful doing it, please weigh in. But Wayne, you want to go first on that?
What specific part of the question am I addressing?
How can we, as leaders or managers or directors, provide feedback upward, right, to senior leadership in the organization?
Yeah, I think that, boy, this is an analogy nobody will ever expect to hear come out of me. Managers, wherever you are in the organization, are literally the heart of the organization. And I don't mean that in the Oprah soft and mushy kind of way. I mean it in the sense of, what does the heart do? It takes blood, it oxygenates it, and sends it out. And for human beings, we take information from the organization, we process it and send it out to the team. We also take the information from the team, process it, and a big part of our job is to help the organization understand what's going on. And interestingly, it's the same three sources of feedback, it's just going in the opposite direction. Very often we're reluctant to give feedback because we lack the authority piece. Right? It's not our job. They've got a bigger title than me. Therefore, I'm not comfortable or I'm not willing to give that feedback up. If you go to outcomes and others, as Kevin has said, if we're focused on the outcomes, then this feedback is necessary to get the outcomes that we want.
Keith gave you an answer. I just now read that, Keith. So, you know, if I'm blushing, that's why. But seriously, I think the key is and if it has something to do with something that we've done, great. But the real thing is they need, Wayne's analogy is a perfect one. People, we don't know what we don't know. And I can tell you that I've worked with lots and lots of very senior leaders over the years, and most of them will say, I just wish people would tell me what's really going on. And then I work with leaders in the middle and everyone else, and they say, how do I tell them what's really going on? And I'm like, go tell them. Now, I'm not saying you have to live in your own world. And if that chancellor, I'm using Amy's example, if that chancellor is a person like, I don't think they'll actually hear it, that you have to recognize the political realities. But I would say really check that assumption, because in most cases, people really do want to hear what's going on. And you can do that in a way that will be palatable and still clear, right? You don't have to be overbearing and bossy and roll your eyes when you walk into their office. But the reality is, if you almost always, they really do want to know. And that's the encouragement I would add to that, Amy. Maybe you start with HR. That could be that becomes the political internal, like what you need to do. And we can't really answer that question. We can help you suss it out individually, but you know, go ahead, Wayne.
Well, just on a purely tactical basis, if you preface the feedback by quoting the person, right? Hey, you were asking what they're saying. You asked for certain information. Can I give you some? Right?
Absolutely.
Is positioning it as a benefit to them. Again, you're coming from a place of relationship and expertise rather than authority, which you ain't got.
You don't have positional authority. Right?
And for HR people, he says very delicately, depending on the organization, there may be a relationship or a credibility or a political difference between HR and other parts of the organization. That's not sadly uncommon. So positioning it from those other two rather than the position of authority is the way you're going to get heard.
I'm just taking I haven't even read all the questions that are down below. So if I apologize if they're out of sequence. David asked, what's Google's reasoning for everyone coming back? And I have to admit, it's been a while since I read it, but my recollection was it's about, we think we need the collaboration.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Fast Company did an article on this actually not too long ago. And, you know, Google is an engineering culture. Since the 70s, engineers, other than software engineers, which is a different animal, engineers have believed in affinity distance. There was that famous study that showed if your desks were more than 30 feet apart, communication suffered. If you were on different floors of the same building, you may as well have been in a different city in terms of the amount of collaboration that goes on. So just as when Yahoo overreacted and said nobody's working from home, just as IBM did the exact same thing in certain of their divisions, we're getting better results when people are together than when they're apart. And so that's what we're doing.
If you go back to the webinar that I did last week, we talked about, think about the work itself. The right answer about how together, how apart, how hybrid, part of it has to be the nature of the actual work, right? And for some of it, it might make more sense to be together most of the time, right? You know, and you also heard me say that the past was black and white. We're either together or we're not. The future is going to be a whole shades of rainbow. And the champ at the end of the day, I think Wayne's right. You know, some people are going to one end or the other. I mean, there's some people that are saying we're going to stay remote forever, right? And some people, or as long as you want, right? Individual, Ford, basically that's what they're saying. right? GM basically saying the same thing. How about that, by the way? If I just said to you 3 years ago, we're going to do this, all this, and then every company's going to make a decision, and one company's going to send to bring everybody back, and another one's going to say, make your own decision, and one of those is Google, and one of those is Ford, which would you have bet? Not the way it went. I think that's a really cool thing, actually. And GM and Ford basically said the same thing. They came at it slightly differently. They both said the same thing. And to think that that's the way it went, you wouldn't have bet on it, would you? I wouldn't have bet on it. So, people are answering each other's questions in the chat, which is awesome. You know, it's the word community is a pretty strong word, and I'm not sure we're all the way there, but I felt like throughout I watched the first webinar that Wayne did, and then of course led to, and then being in this, I feel like that, you know, you guys are starting to recognize faces, you're starting to chat with each other, and that's really what I think ultimately hope for here.
Kevin, could I ask a question, please?
Please.
Sorry, it may be a bit tangential, but first, by the way, Wayne, you got at least one person that got your Chris Christopherson reference. But no, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the role of the informal leader as we get into this ever-increasing remote workspace, if you think that's part of this conversation.
You want to go first, Wayne?
Allow me to introduce you to the long distance teammate. I've always been a big believer that there are big L leaders and little L leaders, right? Big L leaders are the ones with the title. And every team and every group of humans has those people who just lead by example, by behavior. And sometimes that is awarded a formal title and sometimes it's not.
And sometimes for good and sometimes for ill, but.
Exactly. Just because you are called a leader doesn't necessarily mean anyone is following. But I think, you know, one of the things about long distance teammate, not to be a shameless plug, is real teammates are leaders. They offer feedback to their peers. They are willing to push for ideas that they think matters. They are ethically visible, and those things can't help but make you a leader. My daughter, from her very first job, she's 28 now, from her very first job, at some point in the first 6 months, would come home and go, they keep trying to make me a manager. And it's like, well, you know, whether you want to be a manager or not is another story, but why do you think that is? And it's because she exhibits the behaviors of a leader. Whether she wants the job or not is another story, but it's just the way she operates and the way that she operates with her teammates.
So Bernard, let me add this to that thought, that while what Wayne said is exactly right, that's always been true. I think especially in hybrid settings, those informal leaders will become even more important. I mean, the ones that are leading us in the right direction, not the ones that are, you know, that are causing chaos and such, right? Because the workplace is going to continue to get more complex. And so that's going to make the job of the formal leader, big L leader, even more challenging. And so having people that they can go to, or that they can rely on, or that they can count on, I think is going to be critical. And the really good thing about that is that organizations have been struggling for a very long time with thinking about how do we determine the pipeline, right, of the people that might be what we might call emerging leaders or future leaders. And I think this will be an opportunity. We can choose to make this an opportunity to be nurturing and growing those people, or seeing them in new ways that maybe we didn't before, because I think their value will become even greater and perhaps become more obvious.
And I think that the biggest leadership skill, the biggest leadership behavior that will bubble up in remote and hybrid teams is the ability to bridge that distance, the ability to include the people in the office, consciously include and draw on the people in the office. And for the people in the office who are consciously including and drawing on the expertise of those who aren't there, people who are conscious of those connections and know how to leverage them and maintain networks, maintain and grow networks, are going to be the real MVPs, I think, on these teams.
So Keith, your point about trust, dead on, right? I mean, I don't know that Wayne or I have had any conversation with a client or taught any sort of workshop, whatever you want to call them, workshop, keynote, or whatever, in the last year and a half where the word trust didn't get mentioned. I can't think of one where I didn't mention it. So I think that's right there. So Laura says, I work in community corrections. We are examining a hybrid approach to remote work. We keep getting hung up on how to determine the number of hours per week to allow in remote settings. What is optimal? How do you arrive at the needs? So I would say a couple things, and then Wayne, you can add to that. You can see it there in the chat, Wayne. Mm-hmm. The first thing I would say is that there's no way I can know I'm not going to give you an answer. And if a consultant tries to give you an answer, you should run the other direction. What we can do is help you think about the how, but you have to determine the what, right? I think I'll go back a little bit to what I said earlier. Think not just about needs, but also wants, right? I think your trust question is important. But part of what I would do, and I guess it depends on your culture and where leadership is here, but yeah, so let's talk about some of the key considerations. But one of the things is one of those considerations ought to be is, what do those workers think is the right answer to that question? Like, ask them, hey, we're going to be hybrid. It sounds like you've already made that decision at some level, but that decision only really means is that we're not forcing you in or we're not forcing you out. Okay. They cannot agree. So we've got as far as we've agreed on hybrid, but we have no idea what that means. Is that right, Laura? Cool. All right. But that's cool because that's a direction. But as you're just saying now, but that means like 100 different things. Fair enough. Right? Fair enough. So go back to what we said to Thea. Organizational wants and needs, individual wants and needs, right? So let's think about the needs in terms of the work, right? So the considerations are the nature of the work, how successful have we been when we were fully remote or not, right? Where have we had gaps? How would being together help us close those gaps? So look at the work and have that conversation. And then, and so don't just ask the leadership what they think the answer is, ask the team members what they think the answer is. And clarify the difference between want and need. We're not just, we'd love to know what you want, but we also want to know what you think we need. What do you think the right amount of time is in or out? I think to get there, especially if you've made the first decision, you want to get as much input into that next decision as you can. And the questions have to be about wants and needs.
I'm going to
Wayne, what do you want to add?
I'm going to get a little more prescriptive than that.
Okay.
I think you need to get really, really clear on what is the current state and how is that relative to what you want. One of the things that people are starting to discover or uncover, I guess, is that teams that work together before the diaspora have maintained those relationships pretty well. Teams that were high functioning before, the fact that they're remote hasn't really damaged that much. Where teams are struggling is it wasn't so great before, or we have all these new people and how do we get them incorporated? So as we're thinking about what is the current state, are they mostly, do they have existing relationships? How is that already functioning? What's the percentage of old hands versus people who are brand new? And then you can get really tactical and practical about, okay, how often do we need to get together face to face in order to ramp up inclusion into the team, in order to get people productive? And that's when you can start to get a little more prescriptive, but you need to understand the current state really, really well. And then you can make some good decisions. Kevin's got his finger.
And I'm just going to add one thing to that, because I think that's right on. And the thing I would add on top of that is, what is our current state, success of the team and all that stuff that Wayne said, and how many people are new, and then how do we see the future? Like, is our team going to keep growing, or do we know there'll be a lot of turnover, which is just one more fuel to what Wayne is saying. Current state, and what do we see? Like, we're talking to some organizations, hey, we're expecting to grow by 30% in the next year. Okay, well, that means that these teams are going to be completely new, or there's going to be a bunch of continue infusion. So how do we now leverage the hybrid nature or the in-person time to manage the creation of what some of those things that we need?
Can I ask a question?
Andrea, go ahead.
So I've noticed I've been internal and external through this time. So I've been an internal consultant and an external consultant. And one of the things I've noticed is, you're right, teams are good before, they're good now, but what we're losing is the cross-organizational vertical connections, right? People are getting isolated, and then the people that are isolated are super isolated. So I'm wondering, as you guys have kind of wandered in this remote, are there ways, or have you found things that groups have done, like organization? Because I can see all of this time that you're like, oh, come in for 2 days a week, but that's still just like team cohesion. But you need those vertical, like you need managers talking to other managers, you need like a cross organization connection, so that if you're stuck in a team that's, like, I think we're all in these, it's almost like we all went on mat leave and we haven't seen anybody outside our core team in a year, right? Like, you see people and they go, oh my goodness, I haven't seen you. So have you seen anything that helps build that kind of entanglement across organizations that needs, like, that kind of builds that resiliency?
Well, the first thing I would say is that may need to play into what version of hybrid you create. Because if the version of hybrid that you have is everybody comes 2 days a week, you could end up with the same people coming 2 days every week. And so now we actually fraction it more, even within the team. But that might allow for some of that other stuff to happen. If you're doing what Cheryl's saying, if you look over there about the hoteling, if your organization is going to go to that mode, then I think that, maybe there are ways to create the need or create the opportunity that meets your need, Andrea. I think you can't solve it unless you recognize that need. And if your organization is seeing that problem and recognizes that problem, then you need to think about how you take it into account. Because some of that just took care of itself before we were on the same floor. We walked down the hall, we saw them, oh, by the way, right? So depending on how you do hybrid, some of that might take care of itself. But depending on how you do hybrid, it might not help it at all. So I think, I'll stop talking. Wayne, do you want to add something to that?
This is only half formed in my head, so this may not come out as coherently as I think it is. I think as we're thinking about outcomes and others and doing all that good stuff, one of the things that we've gotten away from is we've gotten so task focused since we've gotten remote. We've gotten so focused on doing the individual tasks that we're not taking the big picture view. And I think we need more intentional cross-functional work. You need to have those, let's get all the managers of these different divisions together. Let's bring somebody from accounting onto our team call so that everybody can talk to them and we can discuss this issue, so that now everybody knows Alice in accounting. We need to be much more mindful, because we're higher in the organization and we can see where those connections need to be. People aren't going to voluntarily say, I need to meet somebody in accounting, right? So we have to help them encounter people in accounting and help jumpstart those relationships, and then people can do that. And whether that's in person or bringing people into your team to introduce them, that's going to
or or being more intentional about cross functionality in projects.
Yep.
Right. Which I think is another thing that I would add to what I was thinking earlier that I didn't actually say, is being intentional. And Wayne really keyed on it, is building work around the cross functionality, because, you know, you've probably heard one or both of us say this over time. A number of you have been with us in a number of different kinds of settings, is the longer we work remote, the more insular we become. Right. And that's just the psychology of it. So I would say that, to Tom's question about we're non-confrontational and we're just going to, we're just going to let things sort of float. The problem with that is that we're going to definitely lose all the cross functionality, because maybe we were already siloed. I know the type of business that you're in, right? Which actually is shared by several others in this room, that being higher education, that we were probably already siloed. This certainly hasn't helped it. And if we're not even going to have any sort of intentional conversation about it, that's only going to get worse. And all of the stuff that Andrew is asking about and is concerned about, rightly so, is going to just totally get lost. Tom,
if I might comment on that a second, and it goes back to my earlier comment. Having not been in the office for so many months or whatever, I have to be on campus later this week, and it's a conversation I'm going to stop by our HR department and see what kind of, what has been talked about, because you have people like myself who are sitting out here who are actually enjoying working from home, but do also understand the implications of, the silos and the, working alone and being out of the loop and that type of stuff. So it's, if you're planning on doing this, what's your plan for going forward? So it'd be nice to be able to hear something. The unfortunate side of it is, being in higher education, we're kind of at the mercy of what the state has mandated as far as working out of the office, if at all possible. So, and that decision is that nobody's allowed to come back to the office until, I think it was September or October of this year. There's a little bit more to it than that, but it's, so they're kind of weighing on that. And once that decision gets made, then they'll probably make a decision how they're going to handle ours. I hope they have a plan in place, plan A, plan B. So we shall see.
They should hire a smart guy from Las Vegas, because they don't want to hire me because they might know me. Tom is from my hometown originally, so that's why I'm saying that. You got to have an expert, which is someone more than 50 miles from home. So they should hire Wayne. So Amy asks a question that is a really interesting one. How do you make an equitable plan when you know some people do better at home than others? Some are taking advantage of it. If they do the same job, that's, to me, is a straight up performance issue. And to all of our HR friends, if you haven't been documenting that, you need to get on that, right? Because if someone's not doing well in terms of their production, productivity, quality, whatever the measures are, then hopefully they already know that. And if they don't, now's the time to figure that out. Right? I mean, if they were doing great before and they're not doing great now, the question is, or if they were doing okay before and they're not doing okay now, the question is how much of it is related to the remote, and do they even know? And so it's pretty hard for them to manage that. If, do they know? Make it clear. If you need to say at some point that, you want to work at home, these are the standards you got to meet, can't meet. I mean, I don't think that is necessarily, I mean, it may be a hard conversation, but I don't think that's a hard answer to get to. Wayne, you want to add to that?
Well, it is a performance management issue. And it leads to an interesting discussion I had with a client the other day who said, we've been really understanding and empathetic about the challenges people are going through working from home and trying to grant them a little grace and all that stuff. They're going to be in for a rude shock when they come into the office and we actually expect them to get their work done. Kind of crudely put. But it does lead to the issue of, yes, you can be empathetic and understanding, and we still have to be managing the performance. We still have to set expectations. We still have to coach. We still have to address things. If we need to cut somebody some slack because of illness or whatever, that's a decision we can make. But if we're not having the conversation and we're not setting the expectations and we're just letting stuff slide, then yeah, that's going to be a performance management issue.
Yeah, and this is Amy. I have addressed the performance issues with the individuals. It's just, my bosses and I have been talking about bringing people back, and we do have some people who definitely do not need to work in an office, who definitely do better at home, and some who are not meeting that expectation. We have discussed that with the individuals, but we just really want to make sure, as we're looking at this and getting guidance from the university and the state, as someone brought up, that we are making it as equitable as possible across the groups.
Well, one of the things that one has to ask is bringing them back to the office going to result in a major change, or is that just the wrong person for the job, no matter where they're sitting? And that sounds cold, but sometimes you got the wrong people in the wrong job, and the location is a secondary complicating factor.
Absolutely, 100%. Like, that's why I said, were they doing it before and not doing it now? And if that was the case, then is even the remote part of it the issue, or is it what I would call the COVID layer? Like, is there something else going on that just looks like it's about the remote, and it's maybe not that either? It sounds like maybe you already have that part figured out, Amy, but we don't want to assume that that's it either, right? So, Elizabeth, I'm not sure there was something there that you had. If there was a question there, either I read it too quickly or I didn't catch it. So can you maybe unmute and tell us, or type something in so I know that better, because I missed it.
Yeah, I was just mentioning how for years, I've been at my job for 26 years. I normally work in an office setting. We have offices where people work with customers, and then we have a call center too. And for years, they told us that our work couldn't be done by phone. And so, it's well, this is how it's always been. Well, then the pandemic hit, and boom, they sent everybody home except for a small skeleton crew. And I've got some workers that are doing okay at home, and I've got some that are like falling apart, And so they keep pushing our time back to when we're going to go back to the office. And now it's September, but they haven't really said how it's going to look, what it's going to be like. Is it going to be, everybody's going back, or is it a hybrid hotel, whatever?
Right.
And so staff is getting frustrated with the lack of information, and we keep talking to them saying, we don't know what it's going to look like yet. We haven't been told. And, so we're pretty much in the dark as much as they are. I think our leadership team could do a little bit better job of communicating some information out to people as to what they're thinking it might look like. And just saying, this is what we're thinking. What are your thoughts on it? Get some input, but that hasn't happened yet.
So, that goes back to, I'll say two things to that, Elizabeth. One is that take that thinking, that was a conversation we had earlier about giving feedback upward, and try to have some influence on letting people hear what the challenges are, right? About not knowing, having any sense of what's going on. And then the second thing is that, my reaction was, if I've got people that are floundering, September is a long time from now. So then I've got to keep my leader hat on, and what can I do to support them? How can I help them get better? What is in my ability to influence, to help them understand where their challenges are, what their issues are, whether that's more the non-work stuff interfering, and then how do I help with that? Or is there still stuff I can do to help them still be as successful as possible where they are? And that's the thing I hear.
Yeah, and I have monthly meetings with my staff to go over their performance measures, and two, also to do a check-in with them to make sure they're doing okay. And they tell me, yeah, I'm doing fine. And then I find out they're actually falling apart later.
Yeah. So that's why it's important that, and I don't know how big your staff is, but that's why we need to have the group meetings, but we need to be having one-on-ones or checking in, because if they're falling apart, they're not going to say that on the team meeting, most likely.
Correct. And that's why I have the one-on-ones with them to get to the nuts and bolts of it and say, hey, you know, I'm here, but I can't fix or help you fix something if I don't know about it.
Absolutely. The other thing is you have
know,
to remember, as somebody who's been married a long time, nothing is fine. When people say it's fine, there is more conversation required because nothing is fine.
Well, so, fine just isn't good, right?
And I won't tell you what it stands for. So there we are. Thank you for your intuitiveness on that. I appreciate it.
Bernard asked the comment about onboard, about recruiting, about the job interview process. Yeah, as a person who's been hiring people remotely for a long time, it's a big part of our interviewing process. You know, what do you do when you're working remotely? How do you make sure you build relationships with other people? All of those things, 100%. Okay. Yep, for sure. Hey, everybody, it is 4 minutes to an hour. Wayne has to go because he's got something he's got to do at the top of the hour. I can stay for a couple more minutes. We're certainly not going to ask you to stay. A lot of people have this stuff, but if you have something you still want to ask, a lot of people saying they've got to run, and I certainly understand that. But I'll stay for a couple extra minutes if anyone wants to make another comment, ask another quick question. I'll do that. But this will be sort of the formal close. So thank you all for being here, being a part of this with us, and for participating and engaging in the ways that you have and sharing your ideas in the chat today, especially. And of course, if there's anything we can do to help you or your organizations, let us know. That's why we're here. And that doesn't necessarily, clearly from this process, that doesn't necessarily mean writing us a check, although we're not opposed to that either, right? So anyway, so Wayne, go.
Yes, I have to go do that. Thank you, everybody. It was lovely talking to you. So much fun. Thanks so much and good luck.
And Wayne's exactly right. Do reach out on LinkedIn and connect with us if you're not already. We would love that. It's in a way that you can ask us a one-off question into the future. 10 weeks ago, we started a newsletter on LinkedIn as well, called related to me. So if you do already follow me, look for Remarkable Results newsletter. It comes out every week, and it's pretty much the lead story every week is talking something about the future of work. 10 weeks in a row, we've now done it. So you can go find that. And if you're connected to me, you can do that, or you can get connected to me, or you can actually find the newsletter. Type in Remarkable Results newsletter inside of LinkedIn. You don't even have to follow me. You can just get the newsletter. That's up to you as well. So anybody have a final question, final thought, something else you want to share or ask anybody? This is the first one where Keith hasn't said something out loud. He's typed, he hasn't said something out loud.
I'm trying to save everyone. No, I do want to say thank you, Kevin, you and Wayne both for having these. These have been great, and I know I'll throw out a plug if you want for. I'm looking at joining the book club coming up. I've not read the book yet, so that would be a great way to introduce that to me and maybe some others on the call that haven't done that. And then I know I recommended your website to my boss. And it was funny because the very next week she came out and did all these meetings now that we're setting up to make it clear. That was one of the complaints on the last call. Like I didn't know what was going on. I don't think she did, but she went and asked and got this rolling from an HR standpoint and got the clarity of how we're going to do things and why we're doing it is much more important than what we do. I think sometimes it really means the most, and people are waiting on that. And that's what we have enough right now that's up in the air and ambiguous that we have to deal with. If there's anything we can latch somebody onto and say, we're going to do it this way and here's why, I think it helps us move forward.
I don't think there's any question about that.
Appreciate you.
I don't think there's any question about that. That's exactly right. And so if we have the ability to do that, or to help make that happen, or as so much of this conversation has been about sending that message upward. You may have heard Wayne or I say at some point that, and he used a similar metaphor when he was talking about the heart, But as leaders, we are a communication conduit of information both directions, right? We are the face and the voice of the organization to our teams. You probably knew that one, but you're also the face and the voice of your team to the organization. So being willing to share that when they might know or may not know how bad of an issue something is, or how real something is, or how urgent it is, how important it is really critical. So
I think when you're in those meetings, sometimes where that's being discussed, sometimes people forget that other people are not in that meeting and don't know unless you tell them. So that may be something.
Leaders said, well, I've said that 12 times. Well, but you've only told it to 15 people, and there's another 500 people that haven't heard it yet, right? Very true. Repetition is the mother of learning, but if we never heard it, there's no chance for repetition. So anybody else? Going once, going twice. Thank you all. It was a
Thanks,
pleasure.
Kevin.
Let us
Bye.
know how we can help. We'll see you all another time. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.